Hi, Cardstack community. My name is Chrissy, the founding director of the Cardstack project, coming to you from the land of the Web3. Welcome to another episode of Web3 Watch, where we do fireside chats with professionals and practitioners in the Web3 field. Today, we're joined by James Beck, the director of communication at ConsenSys, one of the leading blockchain company, both in terms of development tool and consumer product, as well as enterprise services. Welcome, James.
Thank you for having me. And I did some research on Cardstack before this, and think you're building some awesome tools to help people, build Web3 applications. So it's great to be here.
Nice to have you join us for this chat. Again, in your role at ConsenSys, can you tell me about your approach of kind of spreading the news or the opportunity of Web3 or crypto or blockchain? What has been kind of your target audience? What are the people you feel like you want to reach out to, and what are the people who are coming and kind of heeding your message and kind of meeting you in the middle?
Sure. So I joined ConsenSys 4.5 years ago. In 2017, a lot of what we were doing at ConsenSys was educating people about Ethereum. What is a blockchain? How is it different than other typical data structures? What is a cryptocurrency? How does Etherscan work? How do you use MetaMask? How do you build your first dApp with Infura? When you think about ConsenSys today in 2022, a lot of that is similar, except we have an entire ecosystem of companies and even competing services that have really given us a lot of hope that Web3 is not just a new sector, but people are really understanding the ideas of what it means to have, a censorship-resistant app or self-sovereign data. So, when I think about the evolution of our writing, a lot of the early concepts around explaining how a blockchain worked are a little bit less important now that you have people getting into Web3 through culture. And when I say through culture, I mean, they find, okay, there's this NFT community, maybe they're attracted to the image, but maybe they're attracted to the people that are buying NFTs. And so they use MetaMask, and they don't even know that, on the back end, it's using Infura, or maybe they're not aware of Etherscan and checking the transactions and making sure it's been confirmed. So we're focused a little bit more on helping users, one, understand the apps out there, but two, keeping their assets safe. MetaMask, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is a self-custodial wallet. So it's really about keeping, your secret recovery phrase, also known as a seed phrase or a private key, safe. And so a lot of the writing we do now is focused on educating and onboarding new communities into Web3 applications.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see it from like explaining the technology to kind of embracing or popularizing the culture. The analogy I've used in the past is like, the beginning of any type of technological revolution, like the automobile, you're talking about transmissions and like combustion engine, and then you're cutting a hole in an engine to show people how it works and showing off all these kind of technology that comes with the different levers within the car. And then now we talk about cup holders or like, import car scenes versus luxury car scenes or Porsche fiend scenes and stuff like that. And those are all communities of people with a common interest where they don't really care about exactly, is that still a Boxster engine or is it some other things? And it's what is stack relish, what is not stack relish. Those becomes more of the conversation than how many horsepower comes out of the thing.
I really like, that's a great analogy. And yeah, it's like, back, I recently studied some, in the United States, we had AOL, America Online.
Right.
And that was a way a lot of people in the 1990s first used the internet, before Netscape even, or after Netscape, and they skipped the steps of connecting more manually. And so you had AOL not just being an educator on what is a web browser. They had to, they had to inspire people to use the internet. They said stuff in early commercials like, imagine a place where you can, bet on a sports team, but at the same time, check your email and keep up to date with the news and join a community for equestrians. Like a lot of what they were doing is creating demand for the internet and talking about why the internet was going to be so great and simplify their lives. We look back on it and it seems a bit old time, even though it was only 20, 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
But in the same way, a lot of the early onboarding stuff that ConsenSys doesn't even produce, but community members produce, are teaching people how to use MetaMask as if it is sort of a new type of web browser. And it's true that there are some new user patterns and principles you need to understand when using MetaMask.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're similarly trying to get people excited about decentralized autonomous organizations, about NFTs, about metaverse or play to earn games.
Yeah.
And so, there's a simultaneously, we're proselytizing Web3 and how it can be used for different applications, but teaching people the basics of this new sort of like Web3 browser or wallet, aka
Yeah.
MetaMask.
It's interesting when you were just using kind of like stating some of the AOL ads about what you can do. I can imagine at the time people were like, "Psh, whatever, that can't possibly be true." But listening with the eyes of 2022 is like, duh, how could it be any other way? So I feel like some of the critic of Web3 is doing the "Psh, whatever, that can't possibly work." That won't age well.
Yeah.
What do you think of that type of like dismissive attitude about there's no way that Web3 will have any use case whatsoever?
Yeah, I think there are degrees to that criticism. So, you can have a big character like Elon Musk tweeting about Web3 and saying, "Where is it?" And that to me, I take a little less seriously than when someone like the founder of Signal, which is,
Yeah, Moxie.
the
Yeah.
protocol that the end-to-end encryption protocol that WhatsApp uses. Moxie's critique was actually really helpful. And our founder, or the founder of MetaMask, Dan Finley, had a pretty lengthy response. But a lot of what he was, responding to, some of it he agreed with in terms of Moxie's critique.
Yeah.
And so when we think about, the reliance of APIs or centralized APIs to fetch NFT metadata,
Right.
or not having a standard, an EIP or an Ethereum improvement proposal standard for reading NFTs. These are things that the community is working on.
Right.
At the same time, I think Moxie's vision of decentralization is probably not a vision of decentralization that is going to be possible for mainstream or mass adoption, whatever we call it. And the reason is this, a lot of the early internet proponents, or people who are talking about the decentralization of the early internet, thought that the best way to host a website was on your own server. And, microservices came about and made it easier for people anywhere to host websites.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're ever going to go back. Similarly, there are some companies, aka Meta, they are really making a bet that people don't want to understand block explorers. People don't want to know what a blockchain is. They just want to buy and sell, digital items, even if Facebook, according to their recent news, might take a 47.5% fee.
Yeah. Yep. Those are numbers you have to sign out just to make sure you memorize this. 47.5.
I think
That's crazy.
people are making bets on, our bet is that we do believe decentralization and that ownership of digital items as an individual is going to be important in the long term. And we'll see though if Meta makes the bet that actually people don't care. If we consolidate the marketplace, they'll be paying 50% to us, no problem.
Right. And I think market power and access and owning the headset, owning the onboard, and owning the business as advertising, there's a tremendous amount of kind of power in that. But it seems like when we use the word metaverse, we are talking about like a more centralized version, maybe because of the co-option with the word metaverse and meta by Facebook and Meta. And then Web3 is defined to have a kind of cultural value of slightly rebellious, slightly loosely organized there. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is saying we are going to be the leader in Web3, because Web3 is kind of out of the bag as something that doesn't have that culture of acceptance, that it's just a universe with a game on it. So what do you think at this point, like, looking at the word Web3, WEB3, what does it stand for in your mind about what it encompasses? And people think it's like, defining an acronym by another set of acronyms, like Web3 is like DAO, NFT, DeFi's, and that's not really helpful. But in your mind, what do you think Web3 stands for, and how is that different than Metaverse?
I actually don't like when people say the metaverse as if there's a single place. And I think Mark Zuckerberg is likely to say the metaverse.
The metaverse, yeah.
There are, I think
the Facebook.
Right. I think there will hopefully be many social media apps or many metaverses.
Yeah.
And we're only going to be, spending time in them if they are, a valuable place to spend time. But so yeah, you're right about that. And with Web3 though, I think Web3, unfortunately, since it's so young, is still a lot of things. When ConsenSys was first around, Joe Lubin, our founder, back in 2016, really liked to talk about Web3.
Mm-hmm.
And he was really talking about it as a money layer for the internet, a
Mm-hmm.
money layer, an identity layer for the internet. And he really, used big tech or, FANG companies like Meta as a counterexample, an internet where these, largely Silicon Valley companies don't own your data, where the user owns their own data. So it's a new relationship on the web between user and the application they're using.
Mm-hmm.
I think how Web3 has evolved, especially with the booming of 2021's NFT scene and
Yeah,
also a
yeah.
lot of the DAOs that are coming about, some of the explanations for Web3 that I think is really a lot of creators and artists and these types of people really like the idea of it being a new patron model for the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a way to directly engage with your fans, but it's also a way for your fans to not only be able to buy something you sell, but
Mm-hmm.
actually be a part of owning the platform
Right.
itself. And so, you see that with different NFT marketplaces that are competing with OpenSea.
Yeah.
One example, Looks Rare, is still taking platform fees for buying and selling NFTs, but they're offering token incentives so that, buyers and sellers feel like they also have a part ownership in the direction of the marketplace.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I really like this idea. The ownership is the delta. That's the difference, right? Web 2 read write, and Web 3 is like read write own. There was like a meme on those kind of tweet comparison between the two. So the ownership layer, and I think what's interesting about it is that to me as a user of these kind of NFT marketplaces, obviously MetaMask is the first place you go, and the fact that the word meta in this is also kind of interesting. But can you tell me a little bit about how you believe this money layer that kind of overlays on top of what look more like a convention, a lot of dApps and marketplace like OpenSea. If you know nothing about Web3 or crypto or Ethereum, just look like a marketplace. So what do you think is the unique experience, especially for new users that are using MetaMask, which I know is one of your leading consumer-facing product and maybe even a developer product when developer wants to integrate with certain APIs and stuff like that. What do you think is the vision for that introduction to a person who is familiar with digital lives, like buying and selling, and this new kind of layered ownership layer? How does ConsenSys, and especially the MetaMask team, think about that type of communication and onboarding of that mental model?
that's a great question, and it's something we're talking about often. I had a meeting earlier today about that. I think it comes down to look at maybe the way that Twitter implemented their new NFT profile picture.
The hexagon thing.
Yeah.
To making
So,
hexagon is an NFT backed and regular is round.
and so if you actually click on the hexagon, you'll see a bit of information about the NFT. And one of the important parts when we say, oh, Web3 is ownership on the internet is how much people care about who owns the image in someone's Twitter profile.
Mm-hmm.
Or when you go all the way up to the upper echelons of fine art, provenance is an authenticity of ownership is a really important thing. And ConsenSys before NFTs were a thing to collect. We were messing around with the ERC 721, which is the token standard that created NFTs as a tool for provenance, except we were thinking of real world items.
Yeah.
So how do you track a tuna from Fiji to your sushi restaurant in New York City?
Yeah.
You really care about the provenance in every step on the way. I think that when we're competing and trying to make people really understand the power of MetaMask, it'll be hard at first for people who have the gut reaction. Hey, this is just an image on the internet. I can right click and I can save it.
Yeah.
Why does it matter who owns it?
Yeah.
But when it comes down to maybe their favorite musician and it's the first song that they create and they release it as a limited edition 30 NFT release, people pay a lot for collecting limited edition LPs and records. The same sort of assumption should happen with NFTs, except the difference is I think sophisticated users will have less reliance on, going to a collector and making sure it is the original LP, or going to a third party authenticator and making sure it's the original sneakers.
Mm,
Instead, you can just look and feel comfortable and confident that this NFT is mine, and I'm the only owner of this, or I'm one of 30.
yeah.
And so making, one thing MetaMask wants to do, and it's in future app releases, is how do we make a lot of this NFT metadata and the information that is really like, it seems a bit esoteric when you read Etherscan or when you look at the blockchain. How do we make that more human readable and easier for people to
Right.
understand?
Yeah.
And then one final point is, I think ENS has done a really good job of introducing the concept of, okay, just like the internet had IP addresses, and then you had, URLs to explain something in human readable terms.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking these 26 character hexadecimal Ethereum addresses and now making them, jamesbeck.eth. So
Yeah, the naming and the shortcuts and the short names. And AOL, by the way, had the keywords you can buy, and Facebook had keywords you can do. And I think this idea of mapping to human space is definitely the first step. But I think what you're saying about that kind of getting more information with its provenance is interesting, right? Because the main critique of NFT is right-click save. I can just save this file. But the power that what you're saying is, and it's what's emerging, is right-click get info, get right-click properties. Is the like who wrote this? Let me go to Spotify and see who's the producer. That type of linkages to those relationships, and click on that person and see the ENS name and like connect with them and support as a patron. That type of networking is really powerful. I think, we think we do that on Facebook if everyone has a Facebook page, but then Facebook really in some way made certain people more important, like advertisers and brands and, businesses and celebrities or even makers are less important, just in the grand scheme of the business model. So I think it's interesting to think of that as right-click get info.
And I also think that, it's inevitable younger generations spend a lot of time on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the bet on avatars and metaverse is also a bet that people really care about the same social status symbols in the real
Right.
world as they do on the internet. And early on, my critique of a lot of the NFT projects were, it's just a digital flex to show
Mm-hmm.
you have an understanding of this technology, or you have a lot of ETH and you bought,
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
NFT. But at the same time, I think, we have this whole collection of our digital identities, and it's still wrapped up in platforms. It's my Twitter followers, it's my Facebook friends. It's, if I'm an artist, and I'm not hosting my own website, it's on someone else's website.
Yeah.
And I think the real cool thing about Web3 and what MetaMask enables is everything you do, every transaction you make, everything you collect, every app you connect to starts forming this digital identity, and one that is owned and custodied by yourself.
Yeah, I think the power of kind of owning your relationship and having that independent of a particular platform is important. I you might know this, but a lot of what we're thinking about Cardstack is like, what's the non-ownership layer? What about the read-write part? Can we write a more Web3 compatible kind of like display platform, programming toolkit for templates that would resemble a store, templates that would resemble a artist streaming page or Patreon page, and we open source those UI as well, so that the ownership layer is kind of like re-centralized around the self, right? Like that's your identity, but the website still can exist, but unlike WordPress, they're more compatible with the way we want to store data with its IPFS and so on. So that's a lot of the kind of tools that we build is bringing Web2 style builder tools to a Web3 compatible, not only delivery model, but also the kind of cultural model of sharing. So.
And I think that's also we didn't even talk about the ethos of open source as being a part of the Web3 ethos. But, I like that idea. And I think in the future, artists especially want to be less reliant on platforms as their main revenue source.
Mm-hmm.
And should be able to create their own storefronts or websites using something like Cardstack that has Web3 compatibility
connection
pretty easily,
Yeah, so that's kind of a lot of what we worked on. When we approach people about this, especially people who don't know about Web3, one of the things we keep running into is the young people are like, what about the carbon impact? Because they care deeply about it, because it's their world that they're going to be living in for the duration where the boomer is leaving behind something and the cleanup. is not even funded, not any way close to being addressed. I know you have a lot of interest in kind of using the technology of Web3 to at least visualize or like make obvious, make clear what is the carbon impact. What do you think of Web3 role in not only address the immediate criticism of the carbon footprint of proof of work based NFTs, but also using that as a way to maybe get people more engaged beyond just being aware of what they can do to use maybe Web3 technology to kind of beginning to address some of these issues on climate change?
I'm glad you asked. Yeah. I mean, look, everyone in the Ethereum community, especially, has long been waiting for proof of work to end and proof of stake to start. So the Beacon chain, which is the proof of stake Ethereum chain, is very active. There's billions of dollars already staked on it. People are earning rewards. It's this chain that's ready. And so what we're waiting for now is called the merge. And the merge is supposed to happen this summer. I'm hearing June or July. And
exciting times.
Yeah. And then like ConsenSys, look, we have an R&D team. We have protocol researchers. We are building our own ETH2 client called Teku that is, powering about 13% of all validators on the network. And so we're very dedicated to bringing proof of stake to Ethereum this year. Before then, it was kind of hard talking to artists and saying, look, proof of work is using an enormous amount of energy to look for the zeros to confirm transactions. Everyone says like, oh, it's about all these computers competing for, finding the next block, but it's really, they're just doing simple hashing and looking for zeros. And so
number matching bingo.
It's number matching bingo. So, and what MetaMask has also done is like and Infura as well, is we support other networks. So Polygon has a proof of stake network. Near through Aura has a proof of stake network. So there are a lot of, basically every new layer one blockchain is using proof of stake and variations on how to come to consensus. But I think that's the future. And Polygon recently announced too that not only were they going to be carbon neutral, they were going to try to be carbon negative. That was yesterday. And that's a commitment they're doing using something that you just mentioned, base carbon tons. So
BCT.
This project I followed called ClimaDAO but started using this protocol called Toucan, and they introduced the first ever like tokenized carbon ton.
Right.
And there are a lot of critiques of carbon credits. Carbon credits are supposed to all represent 1 ton of carbon, but the way in which they represent that ton is, either I'm a farmer and I produce a forest, and that forest is sequestering 1 ton of carbon. That's a real good carbon credit, in my opinion.
Yeah.
In other cases, people are getting carbon credits for, upgrading electrical infrastructure. And so there's really a range in the quality of these carbon credits. But from what I've seen, both Toucan and ClimaDAO, they've been very aware of this, and they have actually a lot of, people in the carbon credit finance space joining the protocol.
Yeah, it's really... thinking about the onboarding a new type of carbon credit as its own DAO to evaluate it and then be able to tokenize it in something you don't have to think about the evaluation. I think that protocol is really clever. We're actually using BCT in the project, again, in collaboration with NYU, to essentially do a carbon offset requirement for transfer an NFT. So before you can sell it, marketplace can demand that you offset the carbon credit of that entire lifetime of that NFT so that you have a check mark that is carbon negative or carbon neutral for that. So we're doing a proof of concept using BCT on Polygon. It would be kind of ironic to do it on the proof of work train. Offsetting something in proof of work, it's hard to get the numbers to work. But, combination of these technologies certainly points the direction towards that. So
I think that's brilliant. And also, I think, I've tried to buy carbon offsets when I take a flight. I mean, that's one of the things you can do.
Yes.
And a lot of them is through Vera, some is through other carbon standards, but it's still not that easy. And I think if, we have these beginning primitives where all the actions you're taking, you're buying a carbon credit to offset it. The whole point of that is that you create a carbon sink. And so there's increased demand for credit, which means that it becomes profitable to not farm your land and maybe,
sell into this
forest and sell it as carbon credits. So I think that actual like market effect could have good long-term effects as well.
Yeah, and then the composability of DeFi and composability of Web3 in action means that that buy button comes with it, not just one-click checkout. It was one-click checkout with offset of carbon credit for everything go in there. If we can convince consumer to value the receipt of the thing that whatever I bought has carbon credit, that creates a tremendous amount of demand. And that's really the most exciting part, is the composability across this primitive of tokenizations, fungible tokens, and thinking about this as the future of commerce and how do we tie this primitive together at the checkout stand. So, well, this is great. Thank you so much for enlightening us.
Yeah, it was a very good conversation. I'm sorry we're already at time.
Yes, but I look forward to continue this conversation on Twitter. But thank you, the Cardstack community, for joining us today. Until next time, take care.
Thank you, Chris.